Settle in. Get comfortable. Some things taste better when someone else made them, even when they shouldn't taste good at all. Chapter 1. The Wolf at the Window. The stew had been on the windowsill for 11 minutes, and the wolf hadn't touched it. Josie leaned against the kitchen counter with her arms crossed and watched him consider it. He was enormous, easily twice the size of any wild wolf she'd seen, with a thick gray coat gone silver at the muzzle and eyes the color of warm amber that caught the kitchen candlelight and held it. He sat on her back step the way a man sits in his own chair, settled, deliberate, weight arranged with the composure of something that had decided to be here rather than wandered in by accident. She'd known since the second night that he was shifted, not wild. Wild wolves didn't sit like that. Wild wolves didn't come back. "It's lamb," she said, allegedly. The wolf looked at the bowl. He looked at her. He lowered his head and ate. She'd been doing this for 4 months. Every night, sometime between midnight and 1, the soft pad of weight on the back step, the quiet presence of something large and warm settling outside her window. She didn't know who he was. She didn't ask. Asking would change it, and right now the wolf at the window was the only creature in the territory who chose to be near her, and that arithmetic did not survive questions. "A wolf is here," Tansy observed. The same flat observation she'd made every night since October. Tansy was Josie's wolf, in the way a stone was a stone, present, unhurried, unmoved by circumstance. She noticed things, she did not get excited about them. A wolf was here. He smelled like pine resin and authority. He had been here yesterday. He would presumably be here tomorrow. Noted. Were they sleeping soon? "Your tail is doing the thing," Josie said. The wolf's tail was, in fact, wagging. It was not a proud wag. It was the involuntary, slightly mortified rhythm of an animal whose body had opinions his dignity could not override. She sat on the floor beside the window with her back against the wall. The night was cold, late January now, the kind that crept through stone and stayed. The wolf ate. She talked. This was the arrangement. He ate, she talked. She told him things she would never have told a person, because a person would have answered, and answering required context, and context required explaining why a grown woman lived alone at the village edge, in a cottage whose kitchen had been described by the postman as structurally resentful of food. The wolf did not require context. The wolf ate the structurally resentful food and wagged. "I tried my mother's recipe again," she said. "The stew, with the bay leaf and the marrow and the slow simmer." She picked at a thread on her sleeve. "It was bad. Not bad the way my food is usually bad. That's just how the kitchen works. I've accepted that. This was bad in a different way. Like the recipe knows I'm not her and it won't cooperate." The wolf's ears turned toward her voice. The rest of him kept eating. She made it look easy. She'd stand at the stove and it would just happen. The kitchen smelled right when she cooked. "I've been trying for 9 years and it never smells right." She paused. "It smells like effort, like someone fighting with a pot and losing." The bowl was empty. The wolf licked it once, precisely, and then turned and looked at her with those amber eyes. And the look was not the look of an animal finishing a meal. It was the look of someone who had heard every word and was holding them carefully. She put her hand on his head. The fur was warm and dense under her palm. He went very still, the specific stillness of something holding itself in place so as not to disturb the thing happening to it. "You are the only creature alive who eats my cooking," she said. "You know that?" My neighbor tried a biscuit once, and I could see the exact moment she started planning an excuse to spit it into a napkin. The tail wagged again. She let her hand stay. "Bucket," she said. "I'm calling you Bucket because you eat like one. And a name makes you real, and I would like you to be real." Amber eyes. Warm fur. The weight of his head shifting slightly into her hand, like a door finding its frame. "I mended the east fence again this morning," she said. Third time this season. The posts are rotting from the bottom. I've been bracing them with stones, but stones don't solve a rot problem. They just postpone it, and I am becoming very good at postponement. She leaned her head back against the wall. I keep the accounts for the village ledger. Did I tell you that? Josie Pruitt, the one everyone calls the quiet one, keeps the numbers that make the market run. I'm good at it. I'm good at things that don't require heat or timing, or whatever it is that happens between an ingredient and a plate that I can't do. I am good at fences and numbers and sitting in rooms by myself, which is a skill set that no one has ever described as exciting. The wolf's tail had stopped wagging. He was listening. His head was slightly tilted, the way a wolf tilts when the sound is more important than the source. My mother could cook and keep accounts and mend a fence and make the whole room feel like it had a center. I got the accounts and the fences. The kitchen went somewhere else. Maybe it went with her. She rubbed her thumb across the back of her own hand, a habit she didn't know she had. I don't know why I'm telling you this. You're a wolf. You eat things that would constitute a health violation in any jurisdiction with standards. The amber eyes blinked. The tail wagged once. She put her hand back on his head. Same time tomorrow? He pressed his muzzle against her palm, and the warmth of it, warm breath, warm fur, the specific alive heat of a body choosing to be near her body, settled something in her chest that had been unsettled for a long time. She sat with him until the cold won, and then she closed the shutter and went to bed. And the cottage was quiet, and the sheets were cold, and Tansy lay alongside her consciousness saying nothing at all, which was Tansy's version of comfort. 3 miles east, in the private wing of Langford Keep, the Alpha King shifted back into human form and sat on the edge of his bed and did not move for a long time. The shift settled like water finding level. Fur to skin, cold stone under his feet. Hands again, which were always the worst part, because hands could not eat her food without expressing an opinion about it, and the food required opinions to be withheld. The scent, said Slate. Slate had been saying the scent for 4 months with the earnest conviction of an animal who mistook repetition for persuasion. Slate was Corwin's wolf, and Slate was sincere in the way that a river is sincere, constant, unhurried, and absolutely certain about where it was going, even when it had no idea where that was. Flower and wild thyme, Slate continued. Under the smoke, under the salt, under the things she burned, it was there. It is always there. I am noting this for reference. You have noted it every night for 4 months. And it has been accurate every night for 4 months. This is not repetition. This is thoroughness. Corwin put his head in his hands. He'd caught the scent in September. A routine patrol. The Langford Kings ran the eastern boundary in wolf form, in the dark, alone, because alphas shifted in private. Protocol and precedent and 6 generations of tradition, which meant no wolf in the territory knew what the king's wolf looked like, which had been a political advantage for 2 centuries, and was now, as of 4 months ago, the logistical architecture of a man's undoing. Slate had caught the scent over the eastern cottages, under the smoke of a kitchen fire, under the salt of something being aggressively overcooked. And underneath all of it, flower and wild thyme, and something warm that had no name, but that Slate had decided instantly and completely was the most important fact he had ever encountered. We should go back tomorrow, Slate said. The cottage fencing is exposed on the eastern side. We have a duty to assess perimeter integrity throughout the territory. If that assessment puts us near a window where food is being made, food which, I want to be clear, is nutritionally questionable but scentily relevant, that is coincidence and good governance. We assessed the fencing last week. Fencing deteriorates, Corwin. This is a natural process. I am not suggesting we go back for the food. I am suggesting we go back for the fencing. The food is incidental. The scent is incidental. The way she puts her hand on our head is entirely incidental, and not the reason we cross 3 miles of forest in the dark. The problem was that Slate meant it. Slate was not being strategic or evasive. Slate had constructed a complete interior world in which a king crossing 3 miles of forest at midnight to sit at a stranger's window and eat food that had once been used as a doorstop was a reasonable act of territorial governance. Slate lived inside that world with the unshakable sincerity of a wolf who had never once questioned his own motives because questioning motives required the kind of self-awareness that Slate had cheerfully opted out of. A knock at the door. His second, Marsh, with the morning patrol report. "The eastern boundary is quiet," Marsh said. "No incursions, no activity." He paused. "You've been running the Eastern Patrol yourself for 4 months. I prefer the exercise." "You prefer the Eastern exercise, specifically, every night. You have not run the Western boundary since September." "The Western boundary is adequately covered." Marsh looked at him. Marsh had the expression of a man who was filing information in a private ledger that would one day require context nobody alive could provide. "Of course, Your Majesty." He left. Corwin sat in the dark with his hands on his knees and the stone floor cold under his feet, and the ghost of flower and wild thyme still somewhere in his sinuses, which was not possible because he was in human form now, and human noses did not carry scent the way wolf noses did. But Slate did not acknowledge this limitation. "The scent," Slate said one more time, softer, the earnestness going gentle as sleep approached. "She makes it with her hands. Every night. Even the things that go wrong, she makes them with her hands." The king closed his eyes. 3 miles west, a woman he had never spoken to was washing a bowl, and her wolf, he'd felt the calm, warm presence of it under her skin, patient and still and entirely unbothered by the enormous gray wolf at her window, was settling alongside her for the night. He should stop going. He wasn't going to stop going. Both facts were true. He held them the way he held most things, carefully, separately, without letting them touch. Chapter 2. The Harvest Feast. The Harvest Feast was the territory's single annual event that required every wolf to be in the same hall at the same time, which meant it was the one night of the year Josie's cooking could achieve maximum public exposure. She had volunteered a stew. She was not sure, standing in the great hall with her pot on the far end of the longest table she had ever seen, why she had volunteered a stew. The stew was bad. She knew the stew was bad. She had tasted the stew at home before bringing it, and the stew was, by any reasonable culinary standard, an argument in a bowl. But volunteering nothing was worse than volunteering badly, because volunteering nothing was invisible, and she had been invisible for long enough. "We brought the stew," Tansy observed. "The stew is here now. People can see the stew." "Thank you, Tansy. It's a factual observation. The stew is visible. That's new." 12 other dishes lined the table: roasted venison, braised root vegetables with rosemary, fresh bread, the kind that smelled right, the kind Josie's kitchen refused to produce. 3 different cakes. The table was a landscape of competence, and at the far end, like a footnote nobody would read, Josie's stew sat in its pot and waited. The hall filled, 300 wolves. She stood against the wall and watched. 5 minutes. Nobody approached her end of the table. 10 minutes. A man reached past her pot for the breadbasket behind it. 15 minutes. The venison was half gone. 2 of the cakes had been cut. Her stew was full. The ladle she'd placed beside it was exactly where she'd left it, undisturbed, like a small monument to optimism. 20 minutes. Josie stood against the wall with her hands clasped in front of her, and her face arranged into the expression of a woman who had expected this and was fine with it. And she was fine with it, because she had volunteered a stew, and the stew was bad, and nobody eating it was the correct response, and there was nothing wrong with the correct response. "Josie," Tansy said, just her name. The flatness gone, replaced by something that was not softness exactly, but was the closest Tansy came to it, which was patience directed at a wound rather than a fact. "I'm fine." "You're not." "I knew this would happen." Knowing doesn't fix it. At the high table, the Alpha King sat with his council. He had been served first, as protocol required. He had eaten what was placed in front of him. He had spoken to his advisors with the measured composure of a man who governed 14 villages and a border dispute and found feast hall politics tiresome but necessary. And he had been watching the far end of the table for 20 minutes. She did not know the king. She knew what everyone knew, that he was private, that he shifted alone, that no wolf in the territory had seen his wolf form, that his jaw had a way of setting when he was thinking that made council members reconsider their positions. She had seen him at a distance. She had never spoken to him. He was the king. She was the woman at the far end of the table, with an untouched stew and an unbroken ladle. Corwin stood. The hall did not immediately notice. Conversations continued, dishes circulated. Then someone at the middle of the table saw the king walking, not toward the door, not toward the council wing, but down the length of the hall, past 12 dishes, past the venison and the cakes and the bread baskets, toward the far end where a pot sat full and a woman stood against the wall. And the someone nudged someone else, and the nudging spread, and by the time the king reached the far end, 300 wolves were watching. He picked up the ladle. He served himself a bowl. He ate. The stew was terrible. It was exactly the stew he had been eating at a windowsill for 4 months. And Slate surged forward so hard that his eyes flashed amber for half a second in front of 300 wolves who did not know what the king's eyes looked like when his wolf surfaced, because his wolf surfaced in private, and this was not private. "Flower and wild thyme," Slate said. "This is the stew. This is her stew. We have been eating this stew at a window for 4 months, and it is here, and she is here, and she made it with her hands, and the hands are right there." Corwin ate the entire bowl. He put it down. "Seconds?" he said. The hall held its breath. Then 3 wolves near the middle stood and walked to the pot. Then 4 more. Then a dozen. Within 5 minutes, 300 wolves were eating Josie's stew because the king had eaten it first, and the pot was emptying, and she was standing 3 feet from the Alpha King, holding an empty ladle and looking into a pair of amber eyes she had seen every night at her window for 4 months. Those eyes, warm amber, the exact shade of the wolf she called Bucket, who sat on her back step and ate her terrible food and wagged when she put her hand on his head. "Bucket," she said. Quiet, just to him. The hall was loud. 300 wolves eating bad stew, and nobody heard. His face did the thing she had never seen the king's face do, and had seen Bucket's face do every night since October. The composure broke. Not all at once, in one clean shift, the way a wolf's ears go forward when it hears the one voice it was listening for. "Josie," he said, "the wolf is you." "Yes. Every night. Every night." She stared at him. The ladle was still in her hand. His bowl was still in his. 300 wolves were eating around them, and neither of them noticed. "You ate the fish stew," she said. "The one with no identifiable fish." "I ate everything." "You wagged." "The tail is involuntary." I told you things. I told you about my mother. I told you about the rent. I told you about the recipe. I put my hand on your head." "Yes." "I called you Bucket." "I answered to it." She was holding an empty ladle. He was holding an empty bowl. The hall was a wall of noise around them, and there was a small, clear, still space in the middle of it that belonged only to them. "Why?" she said. The word hung between them. He looked at her. She looked at him. Pine resin and cold iron. She could smell him now, in human form, and it was the scent she'd been catching faintly at the window underneath the wolf fur and forest. And it was him. It had always been him. He said, "Because my wolf does not taste what the food is. My wolf tastes who made it. You made it. All of it. Every burned, raw, oversalted, unidentifiable thing. You made it, with your hands in your kitchen, and my wolf has never been wrong about anything, and I was not going to argue with the only part of me that has ever known what it wants." One tear. She caught it immediately with the back of her wrist, because she was not a woman who cried in feast halls. She caught it and she held the ladle, and she looked at him, and something in her that Tansy had been patiently, quietly watching for 4 months finally moved. "Oh," Tansy said. Not flat, not bored. For the first and possibly only time in their shared life, Tansy sounded surprised. "That's why he kept coming back." "The stew is bad," Josie said. "I know. It has always been bad." "I know. You are going to keep eating it." He looked at her. The amber was fading from his eyes, but the warmth behind it wasn't. His jaw was set, not the political set, the managed set. A different kind. The kind of set that meant a man had decided something and was not going to be moved from it by 300 wolves, or protocol, or the complete absence of culinary skill. "Every night," he said. "For the rest of my life." She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "Your name is still Bucket." And something happened to the king's mouth that was not a smile, but was the architecture of one. The foundation, the first wall. "I accept the terms," he said. Chapter 3, Wednesdays. Everything was different, and nothing was different, and she was going to have to figure out which one was true before Wednesday. He'd asked to visit. Not at midnight, not in wolf form. In human form, in daylight, at her door. She'd said Wednesday. He'd said why Wednesday. She'd said because Wednesday was the day she cooked the worst, and if he could survive a Wednesday, he could survive anything. "Wednesday seems arbitrary," Tansy said. "Wednesday is the day I make the casserole." The casserole has structural integrity issues. The casserole is fine. The casserole survived a 2-foot fall last month. Intact. That is not fine. That is a construction material. He arrived at 7. He was wearing clothes she had never seen him in. Not the formal court jacket, not the Border Patrol leather. A plain shirt, dark trousers, boots that had seen use. He looked like a man who had spent 30 minutes deciding how to dress like he hadn't spent 30 minutes deciding, and the effort was visible to anyone who knew what effort looked like, on a man who usually made everything look effortless. "He's nervous," Tansy observed. "The king is nervous, in our kitchen." He was carrying groceries. He set them on the counter and looked around the kitchen as if seeing it for the first time, which he was, from this height and with these eyes. He had seen it 100 times through the window, from 3 feet lower, with a wolf's nose. And it was clearly a different room at standing height, with human senses and a door he was allowed to walk through. He stood in the middle of the kitchen, holding a bag of onions and not knowing what to do with his hands. And the not knowing was visible. And it was the first time she had seen him not know what to do, with any part of himself. And the sight of it did something to her that she was not going to examine right now, because right now there was a casserole. "Sit down," she said. He sat. She served the casserole. He ate it at her table, in a chair, like a man, not at the windowsill like a wolf. The difference was enormous, and neither of them said so. He ate the whole plate. The casserole had the structural integrity of a grudge. He ate it the way he had eaten everything she had ever made, with the steady, determined attention of someone who had made a decision about this food that no amount of evidence would reverse. "You don't have to pretend it's good," she said. "I am not pretending it's good." "You're eating it." "Those are two different things." She sat down across from him, pine resin and cold iron. He filled her kitchen the way the wolf had filled her window, with a kind of presence that was not about size, but about the fact of being there, deliberately, because he'd chosen to be. "I have questions," she said. "I assumed." "You came to my window as a wolf for 4 months and ate food that has been used to prop open a gate." "That is a statement, not a question." "The question is, what is wrong with you?" "The scent," Slate said, inside Corwin's head, with the quiet conviction of a wolf who had found the answer to everything and could not understand why the human was still asking questions. "The scent is what is wrong with us. The scent was always what was wrong with us. The scent is flower and wild thyme and the warm thing underneath, and we crossed 3 miles of forest for it every night, and we would cross 30, and the food is irrelevant. The food is irrelevant." "My wolf caught your scent on a patrol," Corwin said. "In September. Under the smoke, under the culinary situation. And he made a decision I have been unable to reverse." "A decision?" "To come back. Every night, regardless of the food." "The food is catastrophic." "My wolf does not share that assessment." She laughed. It was the first time she had laughed in his presence as a man, and it was not a polite laugh or a careful laugh, but the kind that arrived before she could arrange it, and it hit him somewhere behind his sternum like a fist he hadn't braced for. "She laughed," Slate said, stunned. The laugh is even better than the scent. Can she do it again? Ask her to do it again." "I'm not asking her to do it again." Josie looked at him. "What?" "Nothing. My wolf is having a moment." The second Wednesday, he brought onions, good ones, firm, dry-skinned, the kind the market stall owner kept behind the counter for people who knew to ask. He set them on her cutting board with the care of a man presenting evidence and said, "I'm going to teach you to make soup." "I can make soup." "You can make hot liquid with ingredients in it. That is not the same thing." "In my defense, hot liquid with ingredients in it is literally what soup is." He looked at her. His jaw did the thing, the set at the hinge. And then it released into something that was not quite a smile, the ghost of one. She was learning to read those ghosts the way a person learns to read weather, not the event itself, but the pressure that preceded it. He stood behind her at the stove. "Stir gently. You're stirring like you're angry at the soup." "I am angry at the soup." "The soup hasn't done anything." "The soup is refusing to thicken. The soup and I have a history." He moved her hand on the spoon, his hand on her hand, the size of his hand over hers, the warmth of his palm against her knuckles, the specific weight of a man's fingers guiding her grip on a wooden spoon, as if the spoon were important, as if the technique were the thing, as if they were both not exquisitely aware that his chest was 6 inches from her back, and the air between them had changed composition. "The hand," Slate said. "The hand is on her hand. Her hand is under our hand. I am experiencing a great deal of information about this hand. The information is primarily thermal, also sensual. The flower is right there, Corwin. The wild thyme is right there, under our actual palm. The soup began to smoke. The soup, Josie said. Neither of them moved. Corwin, the soup is burning. Neither of them moved. His hand was on her hand on the spoon, and the pot was beginning to blacken at the edges, and the kitchen was filling with the familiar acrid smell of another casualty. And they were both standing in it, breathing it, because moving would mean his hand would leave her hand, and the certainty that the soup was going to be ruined was less important than the fact of contact. The soup is irrelevant, Slate confirmed. The soup has always been irrelevant. We have been saying this since September. Your heart rate is elevated, Tansy told Josie. These facts may or may not be related. The soup burned. It was always going to burn. They poured it out and started over, and this time he stood on the opposite side of the kitchen, which was 3 feet away, which was the farthest 2 people had ever been from each other in the history of small kitchens. The trick with onions, he said from 3 feet away, holding a knife with unnecessary focus, is that you cut with the grain for slow cooking and against the grain for fast. I know how to cut an onion. You cut the last onion into what I would describe as emotional fragments. The onion was difficult. The onion was stationary. She was watching his hands. She could not stop watching his hands. The way they moved through vegetables, precise, steady, the same hands that governed 14 villages and held a pen and lay still under her palm at a window. Those hands on a cutting board in her kitchen, doing something ordinary, something domestic, something a man does when he is in a woman's kitchen because he wants to be there, not because he is running territory or holding counsel or performing the composed, measured, architectural thing he performed for everyone else. He was not performing it here. She could see the difference. The composure was still there. It was always there, structural, the load-bearing wall of a man who had learned early that being watched required being managed. But the tension behind it was different. Not political tension, a smaller kind. The kind that came from being close to someone and wanting to be closer, and not being sure the closing was allowed. She knew this because she had the same tension, and it lived in the same place, in the hands, in the 3 feet of kitchen, in the fact that they were both pretending the onions mattered. Corwin brought the cutting board to the stove. The kitchen was too small for 2 people to cook in it without collision, and the collision was the point of Wednesday, and both of them knew it, and neither of them had said so. His forearm brushed hers as he tipped the onions into the pot. She could feel the hair on his arm against her skin. She did not move. He did not move. 3 seconds of forearm-to-forearm contact while onions fell into a pot. And the 3 seconds contained more information than 3 months of conversation. More onions, he said. There are no more onions. Then we should stop standing at the stove. We should. Neither of them stopped standing at the stove. The soup, against every expectation and precedent set by 9 years of kitchen warfare, was edible. Not good, edible. They ate it at her table, and she said, "This is the first edible thing my kitchen has ever produced." And he said, "The kitchen had help." And the way he said help was not about the soup. He left at 10. She stood in the doorway and watched him walk down the lane. A tall man in a plain shirt, no crown, no court, no composure. Just a man walking away from a kitchen where he had held her hand on a spoon and cut onions into pieces that were not emotional fragments. And the lane looked different with him on it. The whole world looked different with him in it, and the difference was not dramatic or sudden. It was the kind that crept in through the edges, the way cold crept through stone, except this was warmth and it was already everywhere, and she had not noticed how cold the kitchen had been until he started filling it. She went back inside. The kitchen smelled like onions and pine resin. His scent was on the spoon. His scent was on the counter where his hand had rested. His scent was in the chair. "You're standing in the kitchen looking at his chair," Tansy observed. "I'm not looking at the chair." "You are looking at the chair with the expression of a woman who is considering the chair. I am noting this without judgment. There is judgment in your voice." "There is no judgment in my voice. There is never judgment in my voice. I am simply observing that you are standing in a dark kitchen at 10:15 at night, contemplating a piece of furniture because a man sat in it, and your heart rate has not returned to baseline since 7. These are facts." She turned the lamp off. She went to bed. The sheets were cold. The kitchen was warm. The chair was just a chair. She lay in the dark and thought about his hands on the cutting board and his forearm against her forearm and the 3 feet that had felt like 3 miles, and she did not sleep well, and she did not mind. The weeks built. He came every Wednesday. Wednesday extended to Thursday. Thursday crept toward the weekend. By the 3rd week, he was bringing bread dough and she was killing it. The yeast died every time, sitting in the bowl like a philosophical objection, and he said, "The yeast was alive when I bought it." And she said, "This kitchen is where yeast comes to die." And neither of them mentioned that he was standing closer now, that the 3 feet had become 2, that 2 had become 1, that 1 had become the distance you close with your hand if you just reach. He reached past her for the flour. His chest brushed her shoulder. She stopped breathing. He stopped reaching. For 1 full second, they were both completely still in a kitchen that smelled like dead yeast and warm bread dough and flour and pine resin, and the second was long enough for her to feel every molecule of it. And then he stepped back and cleared his throat and said, "More flour." As if more flour were the issue. "Everything is irrelevant except the fact that her shoulder touched our chest, and we have lost the ability to form basic thoughts," Slate said. "This is fine. This is completely fine." The bread never rose. They ate it flat, with butter, and it was not good, but it was not bad. And she said, "This is the best thing my kitchen has ever produced." And he said, "The kitchen had help." The same word, the same careful understatement, and what lived underneath it had nothing to do with bread. He said help the way a man says a word when the word he actually means is too large to fit in his mouth. And she heard the word underneath it, and the hearing was its own kind of contact. She noticed his eyes, the amber flash. She'd seen it at the feast, quick and gone. But in the kitchen it happened more often. When she laughed, when she leaned past him at the counter, when she wiped flour off her jaw with the back of her wrist and he tracked the movement with a focus that was not human, that was too still, too precise, the attention of something with different priorities. "Is your wolf doing the thing?" she asked. "What thing?" "The thing where your eyes go amber for half a second and you look like you've been hit by something invisible." "I don't know what you're talking about." "It happened at the feast. It happened when you walked through the door today. It happened just now when I had flour on my face." He said nothing, his jaw set. "It's a wolf thing," she said, not a question. "It's involuntary." "Like the tail." "Like the tail," she smiled. It was the kind of smile that went into her eyes first and reached her mouth second, and it was aimed directly at him, and Slate lost all coherent thoughts simultaneously. The 4th Wednesday she set a pan on fire, not metaphorically. Grease and high heat and 1 moment of distraction. She'd been watching his hands again, and the pan caught. He put the fire out. She stood with her back against the opposite counter and said, "Corwin, I think my hands are cursed." He took her hands. He turned them over. He examined them with the same intensity she'd seen in the wolf's eyes at the window. Close, careful, the full weight of his attention on the flour-dusted, slightly singed, ordinary hands of a woman who could not cook. "These are excellent hands," he said. "They ruin food. They kept me at a window for 4 months. They are not cursed. They are the reason I am in this kitchen." That is very romantic, and the pan is still on fire. The pan was still on fire. A small fire. He put it out again. After the pan fire, they stopped trying to make her a cook. She prepped, he cooked. She chopped and measured and did the mechanical things her hands could do, and he did the rest, and what they produced together was the first consistently edible food her kitchen had seen. She poured the wine. He tasted it first because she had once served vinegar by accident, and the expression on his face had made her laugh so hard she'd had to sit on the floor. "The floor," Slate said. She sat on the floor. The laugh happened on the floor. The floor is now important. We should note the floor. We are not noting the floor. The floor has been noted, filing it with the scent and the hands and the shoulder from the bread incident. The file is large now. The file is very large. I am not concerned about the size of the file. The village figured it out, not the wolf part. Nobody connected the shifted stray to the king. But the king visiting a village cottage 4 nights a week, walking the lane at 7 with a cloth bag of parsnips and onions, was not subtle. One grandmother said to Josie at the market, "The king carries groceries to your house and you still haven't learned to cook?" And Josie said, "He's teaching me." And the grandmother said, "Darling, that man is not coming for the cooking lessons," and walked away. And Josie stood in the market with a turnip in one hand and the truth in the other, and was not sure which one was heavier. She kissed him on a Thursday. Not because Thursday was significant, because Thursday was ordinary, and the ordinariness was the point. They were at the sink. He was washing, she was drying. The kitchen was warm and the window was open, the same window where a wolf had sat for 4 months. And the light was the quiet gold of late evening, the kind that makes ordinary things look like they matter, except these things did matter, and the light was not lying. He was talking about the drainage in the east field. She was not listening to a word of it. She was watching his jaw in the lamplight, the strong line of it, the place where the muscle set when he was thinking, the way it had set every Wednesday for 6 weeks, while he stood in her kitchen and pretended the onions mattered. She was watching his hands in the water, the way they turned a plate with the same precision they turned everything. And she was watching the place where his collar met his neck, and the lamplight caught the hollow of his throat. And she was thinking about all the Wednesdays, the spoon and the soup and the forearm and the 3 feet and the bread that never rose, and the way he said, "Help," when he meant something else. And the accumulation of all those Wednesdays had reached the point where not kissing him was taking more effort than kissing him. She put the cloth down. She put her hands on either side of his face. She kissed him. She felt his whole body go still. She knew this stillness. She had felt it under her palm on a wolf's head at a window. The held breath tension of a creature refusing to move because moving might end the thing that was happening to it. Then his hands came up, wet from the sink, one on the small of her back, one in her hair, and the stillness broke, and he kissed her back, and the kiss was not careful. It was not managed. It was not the composed, architectural, load-bearing version of a kiss that a king would give. It was the other kind, the kind that comes apart in the middle, the kind where the restraint unbuilds itself one layer at a time, and what is underneath the restraint is not control, but the long, accumulated, desperate fact of a man who has been sitting at a window for 4 months wanting this, and is now standing at a sink having it, and cannot quite believe the difference between the two. She could feel him shaking, not visibly, inside. The tremor under the skin, under the stillness, the vibration of something large held too long and finally released. His forehead came down against hers, and he breathed and she breathed. And the kitchen was warm, and his hands were in her hair, and the flour on her fingers was transferring to his shirt, and neither of them cared. And Slate said nothing, absolutely nothing. Because for once in 4 months of relentless commentary, Slate had run out of words. She pulled back. Her hands were still on his face. His hands were still in her hair. They were standing at the sink with wet hands and flour on his shirt, and the window open behind them, and the evening was quiet, and his eyes had the faintest ring of amber at the edges, and he was looking at her the way the wolf had looked at her at the window. Not with hunger, but with the steady, absolute certainty of something that has found what it was looking for and is not going to leave it. "The dishes," she said. "The dishes can wait. The dishes are getting cold. Dishes don't get cold. Mine do. Everything in my kitchen gets cold. It's the curse." He almost laughed. The almost was better than the laugh would have been. The ghost of it, held in the muscles around his mouth, visible to her and no one else. She was collecting these ghosts. She had been collecting them since the first Wednesday, the way you collect small proofs that a thing is real. He kissed her forehead, then the bridge of her nose, then the corner of her mouth, slowly, placed, each one deliberate, with the precision of a man who did everything precisely, and was discovering that precision and tenderness were the same thing when aimed at the right person. "I should go," he said. "You should." He didn't go. He stood at her sink with his hands in her hair and her hands on his jaw, and neither of them moved, and the not moving was the same language it had always been between them. At the window, at the stove, in the 3 feet of kitchen that had been the whole world for 6 weeks. Not moving meant, I would stay. I am choosing to stay. The staying is the thing. He went home at midnight, not shifting, walking. She watched him from the window, the same window, and he was a tall shadow moving through the dark lane, and she thought about wolves and soup and onions and the way a man's hands look when they are holding a clean plate in your kitchen because they want to be in your kitchen. And she put her hand on the windowsill where Bucket's head had rested, and the wood was cold, and she pressed her palm flat against it, and she smiled. "Your heart rate," Tansy said, "has been elevated for 5 hours. I believe this is a personal record. I am noting it without judgment, which I would like you to acknowledge, because I have been very patient about the chair and the windowsill and the general situation, and I think restraint of this quality deserves recognition." "Noted. Thank you." He still came as the wolf on full moons, not for the food. She knew he was coming. She opened the shutter. She sat on the inside of the sill, and he sat on the outside, and her hand went to his head the way it always had, and no words, no need for words, because the window was where they started, and some things you don't abandon just because they've grown beyond the sill. Chapter 4. The Candidate. The delegation arrived on a Monday. Formal, political. A rival pack, the Morrigan territory, led by an alpha named Hewitt, who had been pressing for a marriage alliance with the Langford line for 2 years. The delegation brought a candidate. She was polished, well-spoken, and she could cook. The cooking detail was not accidental. Hewitt had heard, through channels, that the king was spending time at a village cottage, and the candidate's skill at a stove was a direct countermove, a woman who could do the thing the king's village interest could not. The formal dinner was on Thursday. Josie attended. Not as a guest. Village wolves did not sit at formal dinners. She served. She carried plates of the candidate's food from the kitchen to the table and set them in front of council members and territorial lords and the king, who sat at the head of the table with his jaw set and his hands flat on the table and his eyes fixed straight ahead. The food was extraordinary. The candidate had made a roast with a sauce that the head cook described afterward as insulting because it was better than mine. She had made bread that rose perfectly, golden, soft, the kind that pulled apart in warm layers and smelled the way bread was supposed to smell, the way Josie's bread had never once smelled in 9 years of trying. She had made a dessert that involved something with honey and cream that made the entire hall smell like a festival. The court ate well. Hewitt watched the king and said, with warmth that had been sharpened to a political edge, "This is what a queen's table should look like." The words landed in Josie's chest the way true things land, not with a crash, but with the quiet, specific weight of a stone dropped into still water, because it was what a queen's table should look like. This was what competence looked like, translated into flour and heat and timing. The elemental thing that happened between an ingredient and a plate. The thing Josie's hands had never learned, that her mother had taken with her when she left. The candidate had it. Josie did not. And no amount of Wednesday cooking lessons or grease fires or dead yeast was going to change the arithmetic. She thought about the casserole with structural integrity issues, and the bread that sat in bowls like philosophical objections, and the pie that survived a 3-foot fall, and she thought, this is the gap. This is the size of it. A woman who can feed a kingdom, and a woman who can't feed a wolf without burning something. He had chosen her when the choice was private, a wolf at a window, a kitchen with no witnesses. But this was public. This was the Morrigan candidate with golden bread and a sauce that made the head cook jealous. And the choice was different when it was public, because public choices had politics attached, and politics didn't care about scent or flour or wild thyme or any of the things that only mattered in the dark. Josie, Tansy said. She kept serving. She served the roast to the council advisors and the sauce to the territorial lords and the bread to the delegates, and she served each plate with the steady competence of a woman who could carry 6 dishes without dropping one, because carrying was something she could do. She placed his plate last. She set the roast and the bread and the sauce in front of him the way she set every plate, precisely, efficiently. And as she drew her hand back, his fingers shifted on the table. Not a reach, not a touch. Just the smallest movement, his index finger lifting 1/4 of an inch as her wrist passed over it. The ghost of contact that didn't happen and that they both felt anyway. Pine resin and cold iron, so close she could feel the warmth coming off his skin. She pulled her hand back. The 1/4 inch of air between his fingertip and her wrist burned. She stepped back. She clasped her hands in front of her apron. She stood against the wall and did not look at him, because looking at him would make this harder, and it was already hard enough. The candidate's bread sat on his plate. Golden, risen, perfect. The kind of bread a queen makes. Josie's bread, if she had been insane enough to bring bread to a formal dinner, would have sat on the plate like a grudge and refused to be eaten. He was going to eat it. Of course he was going to eat it. He was the king, and this was a political dinner, and refusing to eat would be an insult to the delegation. He was going to eat the perfect bread because perfect bread was what kings ate, and her bread was what wolves ate at windows at midnight when nobody was watching, and those were 2 different things, and she had always known they were 2 different things. This bread is wrong, Slate said, inside Corwin's head, staring at the plate through Corwin's eyes with the offended certainty of a wolf who had developed very specific standards. This bread smells like flour and water and heat and nothing else. There is no warm thing underneath. There is no wild thyme. This bread was made by hands that are not her hands, and I am not eating bread made by hands that are not her hands. This is a matter of territorial. It is a governance. It is a scent issue. The scent is wrong. We are not eating the wrong scent. Eat the bread, Corwin told himself. The bread is unauthorized. I am rejecting this bread on grounds of sensual inadequacy, and I am not being dramatic about it. He ate the bread from the common basket, the bread the kitchen staff had baked that morning. Plain bread, ordinary bread. He did not touch the candidate's food. Every dish sat on his plate arranged and undisturbed, while the hall praised the roast, and the lords complimented the sauce, and Hewitt smiled with the careful warmth of a man who was winning. Except the king's plate was full, and Josie noticed because she was the one clearing plates, and when she lifted his, every dish untouched, not a single bite taken. The arithmetic she'd been doing all evening collapsed. She had been calculating the gap between herself and the candidate. She had been measuring it in bread and sauce and honey desserts. And the answer, sitting in front of her in the form of a full plate that a king had refused to touch, was that the gap did not matter. It had never mattered. The calculation she'd been running all night was the wrong calculation entirely. He was waiting for different bread. Worse bread. Bread that had never risen once in 9 years of trying. Made by hands that ruined every ingredient they touched, in a kitchen that killed yeast. He was waiting for her bread. And the waiting was its own sentence, spoken in the language of an untouched plate in a room full of extraordinary food. He didn't eat it, Tansy said. Not flat this time, something quieter. Any of it. After dinner, the candidate found her in the corridor. She was younger than Josie had expected. Dark hair, steady eyes, the posture of a woman who had been trained to be impressive and was tired of it. He watches you, the candidate said. I'm a server. He's watching the service. He has not looked at me once. I cooked for 2 days, not one glance at the food. He ate the bread from the common basket. She paused. He is waiting for something specific, and it is not my cooking. I could produce the finest meal in 5 territories, and it would not matter, because it is not about the food. It has never been about the food. Josie said nothing. I will tell my alpha the match will not work, the candidate said. I wanted you to know it is not because I lost. It is because there is nothing to compete for. The competition was over before I arrived. She left with the delegation 2 days later. Hewitt was furious. The alliance collapsed. The elders, who did not know about Bucket or the window or the 4 months of midnight, pressed the king to reconsider. Corwin held a council session. The elders presented the political case. The case was sound, the alliance was valuable, the territory needed stability, and the Morrigan match was the strongest offer on the table. Corwin listened. He let them finish. He sat at the head of the council table with his hands flat on the wood, the way he always sat. Contained, measured, every word controlled. Then he spoke, and the control was still there, but the thing underneath it was not control at all. I have chosen, he said. The candidate has withdrawn, Your Majesty. I am not speaking about the candidate. He paused. The pause was the pause of a man removing something he had been carrying for a long time and setting it down in front of people who were not prepared for its weight. There is a woman in a cottage at the edge of the village. She cannot cook. Her stew has been used as a doorstop. Her bread has been described by her own neighbor as hostile. She once made a pie so dense it survived a 3-foot fall onto stone. I have eaten every meal she has ever put in front of me. First as a wolf at her window for 4 months, and then as a man at her table for 2 more. And she calls me Bucket, and I answer to it. The council was silent. The alliance will be managed through other channels, he said, because I am not available for a marriage. I am already in the only kitchen I intend to be in. From the far corner of the chamber, Marsh cleared his throat quietly and said, filing this under resolved. Chapter 5. Seconds. Wednesday, her cottage. The late winter light coming through the window she used to close with a shutter and now left open because there was nothing outside it that needed shutting out. She had cooked, not the usual disaster, the specific disaster. Her mother's recipe, the one she had been trying for 9 years, the one that connected her to the woman who had stood at this same stove and made the kitchen smell right. Bay leaf and marrow and the slow simmer. She had followed every step. She had stirred gently, the way Corwin had taught her. She had not added the salt twice. It had failed. The stew was burned, oversalted despite her care. Something in it she could not identify, a bitterness at the back, a wrongness that was not about the ingredients but about the translation, the distance between her mother's hands and her own. She put 2 bowls on the table. He arrived at 7, not midnight. Through the door, not the window, carrying nothing because the ingredients were already here. Tonight she had wanted to try once more. He knew what it was before he sat down. She could see it in the way his nostrils flared slightly. Slate, catching the scent under the smoke, identifying the bay leaf and marrow and the memory underneath them. He knew this stew. Not because he'd eaten it before, because she'd told Bucket about it on a cold October night with her back against the wall and her hand on a wolf's head, and Bucket had listened with the patience of a creature who would never forget anything she said. He sat. She served him. She watched him pick up the spoon, and she wanted to tell him not to bother. It was wrong again. It was always wrong. The recipe refused to come right, and she didn't know if the problem was her hands or her mother's absence or some essential ingredient she had never been taught. But she didn't say it. She let him eat. He ate. She watched him eat the way she had watched the wolf eat for 4 months, with the bewildered tenderness of a woman who had stopped trying to understand why this particular creature kept choosing her worst thing and started understanding that the choosing was the point. Flower and wild thyme. The warm thing underneath that Slate had never been able to name but had recognized before Corwin had, before the scent had words, before the king knew the woman's name. Slate had known. Slate had crossed 3 miles of dark forest every night because Slate had known, and the knowing was not about the food. It had never been about the food. He finished. He put the bowl down. "Seconds?" he said. The word landed in the kitchen the way it had landed in the feast hall 2 months ago. The same word, a different room, a different meaning. In the feast hall it had been a declaration. Here it was a promise. "It is terrible, Corwin." "Yes, it has always been terrible." "Yes, I am never going to get it right. The recipe, my mother's recipe. I have tried for 9 years and I am never going to stand at this stove and make the kitchen smell the way it smelled when she was here." He looked at her. The amber was at the edges of his eyes, Slate right at the surface, quiet for once, just present. "The kitchen smells like you," he said. "Flour and wild thyme, and the smoke and the salt, and the thing that burns and the thing that doesn't. It smells like you. It has smelled like you since September, and I have crossed 3 miles of forest and sat at a window and eaten everything you have ever made, and I am telling you that your kitchen smells right. It smells exactly right. It just doesn't smell like hers." She sat very still. "It doesn't have to smell like hers," he said. "It can smell like yours." He paused. The amber faded. Slate went quiet, truly quiet, not the performative earnestness or the fencing excuses or the elaborate filing system, just gone. And what was left was not the wolf and not the king, just Corwin. A man sitting at a table in a kitchen that smelled like smoke and salt and failure, looking at a woman who had been feeding a wolf she didn't know was him. "I was alone before I came to your window," he said. "Not the way a king is alone, which is a public kind. The private kind. The kind where you shift at midnight and run 3 miles through dark forest, not because the boundary needs checking, but because the house is too quiet and your own hands don't know what to do when there's no one to hold." His voice was steady, but the steadiness was costing him. "You were the first person I told anything true. You just didn't know it was me listening." She looked at him. The composure that lived in his jaw like a permanent resident had loosened. And what was underneath was not weakness, it was the opposite. It was the face of a man who had taken the most defended part of himself and set it on a kitchen table between 2 bowls of bad stew, because she deserved to see it. Something in her chest opened. Not broke, opened, the way a window opens. The way a shutter you've been closing every night finally stays wide, because there is nothing outside it you need to be protected from. "Josie," Tansy said. And then nothing else, because Tansy had said her name, and that was enough. And the patience that had been holding steady for 9 years of failed recipes and 4 months of midnight wolves and 1 feast hall and all those Wednesdays was still there, still calm, still exactly what Josie needed it to be, which was present. She looked at the stew on the stove. Burned, oversalted, wrong in every way the recipe could be wrong, which was every way except the one that mattered, which was that she had made it. In this kitchen, with these hands. The same hands that had rested on a wolf's head every night for 4 months. The same hands that had held his face at the sink on a Thursday. The same hands that had mended fences and kept accounts and done every practical thing a person could do, while the one impractical thing, the thing that connected her to her mother, the thing that made a kitchen smell right, remained out of reach. But the kitchen smelled like her. He had just told her that, and maybe that was enough. Maybe that was, in fact, the whole thing. She picked up his bowl. She gave him seconds. She gave him seconds of the worst stew in 5 territories because he asked for them, and he ate them because she made them, and the kitchen was warm, and the window was open, and the night outside was cold and clear, and neither of them closed anything against it. Bucket, she said. Corwin. Bucket. We are going to have the name conversation. We are never having the name conversation. The name is permanent. I am the Alpha King. And your name is Bucket. Eat your stew. He ate her stew. It was terrible. Somewhere deep, in the part of him that had crossed 3 miles of forest every night for 4 months because it had caught the scent of flower and wild thyme under the smoke of a kitchen that could not cook, the tail wagged. She reached across the table and put her hand on his. The same hand that had rested on his head at the window, the same warmth, the same weight. He turned his hand over and closed his fingers around hers. The kitchen smelled like smoke and salt and burned stew and flour and wild thyme and something warm underneath all of it that did not need a name because it already had one. It had always had one. The wolf had known it first. Home, Slate said, not earnest, not confused, not building an excuse or mapping a perimeter or assessing the structural integrity of anything. Just the word, simple and sure and finally honest. Home. The window stayed open. The stew stayed terrible. The name stayed Bucket. Some things you keep exactly as they are.